Welcome to lesson 3. In this lesson, we are going to develop a block plugin. We are also going to look at the Access API, which involves also looking at roles, permissions, and capabilities. We'll touch on the Form API. We're going to cover the Form API in several sections, and this will be the first part. Then we'll look at custom scripts, when plugins won't do what you need them to do. And then we'll also have a look at site backup. I know I covered blocks in the tour in lesson 1, but let's just remind ourselves. So I'm going to log in as admin, and I am on my dashboard page here, and these little things that look like little widgets on the page are what we call blocks. Now blocks are available all over the Moodle site, but you'll mainly see them on your dashboard in the site home. So this available courses block is a block. It's a kind of special block because it's in the content area rather than in the block area, but it's a block and in courses. So we can have a look at what blocks are available. So if I turn this on and add a block, we'll get a list of all the blocks that are available for me to add to this page. Now the list that is shown when you are adding a block are the blocks that can be added to that particular page or that particular section. Some blocks are restricted, let's say, just to the dashboard. Others are restricted to just courses. But these are the ones that can be added in, and there's a few more than this. If I go back to the dashboard, customizing is the so stop customizing, customize the page. That allows you to add a block, and these are the ones that you can add to the dashboard, and there are all sorts of things in there. You've got course overview, courses, global HTML, which is quite useful if you want to put HTML links, etc., onto dashboards, private files, and that kind of stuff. So I'll stop customizing. So let's go ahead and start to develop our own block. So I'll log out. So we are going to develop a simple block called My Courses. So blocks live in the blocks directory, and I'll create a new folder called My Courses. And my IDE allows me to create multiple directories at the same time, so I'm going to include the language directory as well. So the first file, as usual, is our version PHP, one of the required files. So this is our version file with the stuff at the top that we spoke about, the masthead and the PHP doc bit, and your defined Moodle internal check. And then we have specified the 3 properties of the plugin object, our plugins version, our plugins requires Moodle property, and of course our component name, our Frankenstein name for our plugin as component. Okay, component plugin are sometimes used interchangeably, but component is more when we include the core components as well as the plugins, whereas when you're talking about plugins specifically, you would rather use the word plugins, but it's used interchangeably even in the documentation. So let's create our language file, and that again, Frankenstein name PHP. So our file here with the required plugin name string defined as required by most of the plugins. In fact, nearly all plugins you have to define your plugin name string. Okay. If you remember from our discussion about plugin required files, blocks are one of the exceptions to the rule about defining a lib.php file. Instead, what blocks need is a file in its directory with the Frankenstyle name. So we have a PHP file with the Frankenstyle name, block my courses PHP, in the directory, in the plugins directory. So this is our file with the usual stuff at the top. Now, block my courses is extending block list. There are different types of blocks, and we're going to discuss them now. There are three types of blocks: text, list, and tree. Now the text one just contains a string, normally some HTML. The list is a numerically indexed array of strings, and they normally like a list of links surrounded by A tags. And then the tree type is an array of tree item objects. Now it's not clear in the documentation what the tree item objects are, but they appear to be navigation nodes. So you create some kind of navigation in the block. Okay, so let's go back to our code. So back in our code, we are creating a list type block, and so we extend our block with block list. Okay. Notice that the name of the class is the same as your Frankenstyle name. So same as your Frankenstyle name, and the initial function that you need to define is called init, and it basically sets the title for the block. And in this case, we are getting the string, which we've already defined in our language file for the plugin name, and setting that as the title of our block. Now with these three files, you can actually install your block. So if you had tables to deal with, etc., you will now install your block, and then use the XMLDB tool to start creating your tables. So we're going to go ahead and install our block. So we're logging in. Moodle has picked up there's a new plugin. There's our plugin there. We'll upgrade it. Now let's go and see if in fact we can add the block to our dashboard. So if I go to dashboard and click on customize page, add a block, and we go and look for my courses, it's there, but we have an error. This one here is the Ajax error. Normally an Ajax error, JavaScript error. That's how that displays when it comes up. And if we look at our error here, it says the block my courses does not define the standard capability block my courses my add instance. So now we are going into the realms of permissions and capabilities. So we need to fix that. So let's continue. The reason why we didn't get automatically redirected is because we have debugging on, which you should do when you are developing. So we still got the error there. So what you'll notice that it looks like the block has been added to the page, even though there was an error. So I'm going to delete that from this page. Okay. Still got our error still coming up. And then I'm going to stop customizing the page, and we'll go and have a look at capabilities, defining capabilities. So now we'll look at roles, permissions, and capabilities. So roles such as manager, teacher, and student are in essence a collection of permissions relating to what a user can do in a given context. So the capability is an action, sort of edit a course, delete a course, etc. And the context is in which context the capability is valid. So there are 4 possible permissions that can be set against a capability. Again, remember, capability is the action. So not set, which would mean you kind of inherit it if you've got other permissions or other roles that will allow that permission, or deny it. we've got allow, which is permissions granted for the capability. Prevent, so the permissions removed for the capability, even if it's allowed in a higher context. And prohibit is permissions completely denied and cannot be overridden. Okay, so a user can inherit permissions from a higher context or be denied explicitly. And permissions can also be overridden in some contexts. So most capabilities only really make sense in a particular context. For example, when managing a course or managing course completions, it only makes sense in the context of a course. So Moodle has 6 contexts, namely system, which is system-wide, site-wide, user, capabilities relating to user records and users, course category, which are capabilities that relate to managing a collection of courses which are normally categorized. We've got course related ones, and even more granular module and block related contexts. Site administrators are a special type of user. There's no restrictions, and normally there's no capability check whatsoever. Okay. So the plugins define their own capabilities using the Access API in the file access PHP in the DB folder, which we're going to discuss next. And then generally only external service plugins, web service plugins, require additional roles to be defined. So as a plugin developer, you really don't want to be developing a plugin that requires the site administrator or programmatically requires the creation of additional roles. You define your capabilities, and then the site admin decides which roles get that capability. You can set default permissions for your capabilities. And for more information, have a look at the link on this page. That's pointing to the 3.9 documentation. If you want the 3.11 documentation, replace 3.9 with 3.11. So I mentioned the db /access.php file a little earlier on. So this is where you define your capabilities. And for each capability, you have to define some properties as such. Okay, so one of them is the capability type, cap type, whether it's read or write. Then you set the context level, as we discussed earlier. So you've got system, course, category, module, etc. And then we have a concept of what are called archetypes, architectural types, which are the kind of default user types that come with Moodle. Now, this is a little bit of a throwback to the older versions of Moodle, and you can see why they're still available. The real idea was that they'd be doing away with this, and you'd be trying to manage your access, etc., based on capabilities only. But when you want to define a certain type of users permissions for default permissions on your capabilities, then this seems to be the only real way to do it. So anyway, these types are basically the sort of base types of roles that can be defined. So you can actually create new roles that have the same sort of base manager permissions, and then add more permissions and call it something like super manager if you wanted to. So these are the types, the archetypes: manager, course creator, editing teacher, student, guest, user, front page. So these are special cases to help you specify the default permissions for your capabilities. So there's also optional risk mask, which is basically a way to actually define the risks that the capability poses to the system. So you have things like risk spam, where the user is able to create content that can be seen by others. Risk personal, where access to private information may be made available. Things like cross-site scripting, changes to the configuration, managing the trust of other users, and for data loss, where a user may be able to destroy a lot of data. Okay, so let's go back and define our capabilities. So back in our IDE, we need to define a new folder and create a new file, access.php, in that folder. And this is our access PHP file, the usual stuff at the top. And then you define your capabilities in a capabilities array, where the key for that array is your capability, and then the settings for that particular capability is the value, is another array of values for the capability. So let's have a look at what we've got here. So we've got a capability. Notice that this is not quite the Frankenstein name, it's more the block, and then my courses add instance is the capability. The whole capability is block, my courses add instance. Okay, and my instance is to allow the addition of the block on the dashboard, right? And even if your plugin, remember I said some of the blocks are not specific to, let's say, the dashboard. They'll be only allowed in the courses or on the site homepage. Even if your plugin is not to be added to the dashboard, you still need to define this capability. And let's have a look at the capability. We've got the capability is right. The context level is system. Dashboard's a little bit of a different way of looking at things, and so sometimes it doesn't quite fit into the standard Moodle way. So you would have expected that to be context block, but it isn't. It's context system. And then the archetypes that are allowed by default is user, and that means just about all authenticated users will have that capability because it's their dashboard. They can add the block to their dashboard. And then one thing that I didn't mention in my presentation is clone permissions from. This is a fairly new thing in Moodle, but it allows you to actually copy permissions from another capability. And this is a core capability for managing blocks on the dashboard provided by the Moodle core. So that's for the dashboard. The other capability we've defined here is add instance. This is to add the instance to other places outside of the dashboard. Now I'm sure as this needs to be defined as well, even though as in our case of our block, we are going to only allow it to be added to the dashboard. And in this case, we have a wristband mask of spam and cross-site scripting. The cap type is right. The context level is block. And then the archetypes that get the permission by default are editing teacher and manager. So these archetypes, to stretch it a little bit further, if I created a new role and I use the base editing teacher as the sort of base of that new role, then that role would also get this permission, because at the base level they are that particular type of user. And then again we have the clone permissions from, and this time cloning from the site Moodle, the core Moodle site manage blocks capability. So that's our capability file, our access file. And now we really need to define some strings to describe our capabilities. So we go back to our language file. So this is our language file, and we've added in a couple more strings for our capabilities and a description for each of the capabilities. And having done that, let's up our version. because we've changed the accesses, the capabilities, we've added capabilities, and we've changed strings, we will need to upgrade the plugin. So let's go ahead and upgrade our plugin. So log in as admin. Upgrade. So let's go back and have a look at whether we've got rid of that error. So if we add block, did it slightly differently, we have no error. So if I stop customizing the page, the block has disappeared. That's because if a block does not contain any content, it is not shown. So we'll need to be thinking about that moving ahead. So let me log out. So before we carry on with our code, let's have a look at the Access API. So these are functionality to assist your plugin in working with capabilities and permissions, etc. So one of the first things you're always going to need is your kind of context. So you can get an instance of your context by calling the instance method of the relevant context class as shown on screen. And once you've got a context, you can get other contexts. So you can get the parent context of a context, or you can get the child context of a context. Then other functionalities to check user capabilities. So you can use the function has capability, which checks for a particular capability, and this is the one you probably use the most because you'll be checking for your capability in order to determine whether the user has access or has the right or permissions to do an action within the plugin. Right. You can, of course, additionally, you can check for various capabilities by using the has any capability function, which will check if the user has one or more capabilities in the list you provide. Has all capabilities is if you need to check several capabilities at the same time. Okay, and then there's a function get users by capability, which returns users who have that specified capability. It's a very intense SQL or database call, and so you should use it sparingly, if at all ever. Okay. Then other kinds of useful functions is things like require capability. So that is, it's like saying you has capability, but require capability will throw an exception if the user hasn't got that capability. Require login, which is a bit of an overlap with the Moodle lib API in checking the user is logged in. You can check is logged in. So require login requires make sure that the user is logged in. If not, force them to log in. Whereas is logged in is just quickly checking if the user is logged in. Then you have is viewing, is guest user, and then you can get enrollment information, which is an overlap with the enrollment API. So is enrolled, get enrolled users. And the very useful is site admin to check if the user is a site admin. Okay, and for more information, follow that link and have a look at the Access API documentation. So back in our code, we want to restrict our block to the dashboard. So we need to define something in the class file. So this is our new function, applicable formats, and we return an array with my and with the key my set to true. The default is this. So the default for applicable formats is all, so it can be added to any place in the Moodle instance, and then reset, modified slightly by setting mod false, which then turns off the module allowed at the module level and at the tag level. So you say all and then take away some of the areas that you don't really want the block to be added to. So in this case, all we're doing is saying the dashboard only. So now we need to think about generating the content for our blocks. So we need to add in the get content function. So our get content function is here. Now, blocks in some cases can be added several times to the same page, and so you may have generated the content previously in the session, and so you can return that content rather than redefining the content all over again. Now, down here, the content is defined inside the this content property, and it's a standard class object, okay? And the properties for those objects depend on the type of block. So we're going to stop here and we'll discuss these properties. So our content object properties. So the properties that are available are text, footer, items, and icons. So text relates only to the text type block, and it's basically your actual string content, which of course can contain HTML. Footer is applicable to both text and list, and basically some text that will be displayed below the proper content for the block, usually in a smaller font, and can contain HTML as well. So you got a little footer. Items relate to the list type and the tree type blocks, and so we know what the list is a list of links, and the tree type is a list of item objects, navigation nodes. So those are what your items are. And then finally we have an icons property. The icons property only relates to the list type block, and that's usually image HTML tags, which relate to the list, the items in the list, and so normally you would have the same amount of icons in the list as you have items in the items property. So let's go back to our code. So back in our code, since we are a block list, our properties have to be footer, items, and icons. So those are the properties of our content object. And then basically what to do, we get the enrollment course, the courses that the user is enrolled on, and then we go loop through and get the full name of the course and add it to our content items. We're not adding icons, and we're not adding icons. Okay, but we are adding a footer if the user is editing the page, and we'll look at the page API at some point later in this course. And in the footer, we'll be basically writing some HTML and getting a string that we need to define from our language file. Okay, so we'll swing back to our language file and add in that string. So we have our editing message. You have editing switched on. This time, instead of upping the version of our block, I'm going to clear the cache on the command line. It's often very convenient to do it on the command line rather than do it through the user interface. So let's go ahead and clear our cache. So normally what you would want to do is do this as the web server user, but I have noticed that it doesn't seem to make much difference, especially on my development servers, if I don't do that. But basically we clear the cache, and that's it, it's done. So we're going to log in now as one of our test users and have a look at the block. So back at Moodle, I'm going to log in as one of our users, tool generator, and hopefully I'll remember the password and log in. I won't save that. Right, so I've logged in and I'm on my dashboard page, and I want to customize my page and add the block. which is my courses added. So there we go. We've got my courses block there. The test course, because I'm one of the test users, I'm enrolled on the test course. So there's my test course. I have my little footer on, because if I stop customizing the page, then all I'll have is my test course. I could have made it easier, made that a link so that you could click on that and go directly to your course, but that's there already. Okay, so now let's think about, what if I wanted to change the title of the block? I want to edit it so that I can change the title of the block. Let's go and start adding that functionality in. I'll log out. So one reason you might want to allow a user to, let's say, change the title of your block is that blocks, more than one instance of your block can appear on a page if you allow it to. You can stop it happening, but in most cases, a lot of blocks will be able to be configured differently and then still be added to the same page. So for example, if you had the HTML block with different bits of content in each of the HTML blocks, you would then want to name them something different depending on what the content is. And so in our case, we want to have a specialized setting for our block by allowing the user to add a title to, or change the title of the block. To do that, and any other kind of settings that you might want for your block, depending on what your block requires us to define a form. So let's have a look at the form API before we define the form to change the title of our block. Okay, the form API. The Moodle form API is strongly based on a PHP extension and application repository, a pair library, an old version of HTML quick form, which was version 3.2. Okay, there's a link there if you want to have a look at it. But this is a great example of one of the legacy issues that kind of plague Moodle in some way, in that some things are so integrated that the later versions have to kind of continue to support what would be regarded as old code. I mean, the pair libraries for QuickForm are now called QuickForm 2, and they were rewritten for PHP 5, and the current version of the actual library is now 2.20. So we are still working with the old version, and there's ways that it's been integrated into Moodle. Okay. So most Moodle forms using the API are extensions of the Moodle form class. Now, I've said most Moodle forms because occasionally, especially amongst plugin developers, some people don't use the API and define the forms directly in HTML. But the standard way across all the core components, and as a plugin developer, you should really stick to this, are extensions of the Moodle form class, which is defined in the forms lib PHP file in the lib folder. Okay, and the class is described as the wrapper that separates quick forms, which is the pair library's syntax, from Moodle code. Okay, the exception to extending Moodle forms class is with modules who have a Moodle form underscore mod class, itself an extension of Moodle form, which adds particular useful functionality for course modules. For example, the standard underscore intro underscore elements, which we will talk about at some point later on. Okay. The Moodle form and the Moodle underscore mod classes do not extend the HTML quick form class directly. Instead, there's a property $_form, which is the instance of the Moodle quick form class, which does in turn extend the pair library classes. Okay. Elements of the form are defined in the definition method. So you've always got to have a definition method, and that's where you define your elements, your fields for your form. and it must always be overridden, as I say there. Okay, and creating form elements normally requires the Moodle quick form add element method. So you've got to remember that the Moodle quick form is defined in the underscore form property. So generally, traditionally, the underscore mform property is assigned to mform variable in the definition method. So for example, as you can see on the screen, this makes it easier to just call add element or whatever else you need to call of the methods of this form. And the mform object is what is normally passed not only in the block plugin, in several plugins where plugin is adding fields to configuration or settings form. You'll find that the mform is passed into the function. Okay, so the API supports several different types of elements. So we've got the basic elements, which are the standard HTML form elements. Remember, the HTML5, the later HTML elements are not defined as standard HTML form elements because we're using an old library. There are some custom elements that kind of cover for that. Okay. So we've got custom elements, and custom elements are extensions of normally base element classes, and they are created by calling register element type of the Moodle quick form class. Okay, so you're normally extending. So if you create a custom element, you're normally extending one of the other elements, whether it's basic or the advanced elements. The advanced elements are core Moodle custom elements. So basically the core custom elements are known as advanced elements, and the custom elements are ones that you would have defined yourself. And handling of file uploads is a special case and will be discussed separately in this course. Okay, so all elements are added using the add element method or created using the create element method, right? And all calls expect at least 3 parameters. So the element type, so whether it's hidden, select, text, etc., the form name for the element, and the text for the element's prompt or the label. So the text for the label. And that's usually done by calling the getString function. Most also expect additional parameters, obviously, such as options for a select element. Optionally, an attributes array can be passed, which defines the HTML attributes that for the actual field, so width, color, whatever you want in there. So in this lesson, there's a handout of all the basic and advanced elements and the parameters that are expected. So there are only really 2 required steps to add an element to the form. You define the element with your add element, and then we have to set the element's type. So you specify the input parameters that you expect the field to comply with. So for example, a parameter, a param text or a param int, as we discussed for the Moodle in the Moodle API presentation. And UI elements such as headers don't really require that to be set. There are several other additional methods that are useful when defining forms, but we'll cover them in a later lesson. So let's go back and define our form for to allow the user to change the title of the block. So for blocks to define the form for the settings, you need a file called edit_form.php. So this is our file with the usual stuff at the top. So we are extending block edit form, and the format of your class name is relevant. So we've got edit form at the end, block my courses. Your Frankenstein name needs to be the name of your class. And then we don't have the definition function because we're not actually extending Moodle form, we're extending another form. So we're extending block edit form, which one of its parents will be the Moodle form, as we discussed earlier. So our specific definition, this is specific to us, is we've added an element in there called header, and it's just given it's a header, and we're calling it config header. Now your configuration settings must start with config underscore, otherwise they're not saved as configuration items by the edit block. Okay, so you need to name your configuration with the config underscore prefix on it, and then we have a string that we need to define for the header, and then we have the title of the block, and we have it as a text, and it will be called config title, so it will be a title configuration, and we need to define a string for that as well. And we have set the type of our field, that's our field name. We've set the type to param text. So that's our form. We need to define some language strings. So there is my new string, block title for my block. And what we're going to do, we're going to upgrade the version and then revisit our plugin in Moodle. So I'm going to save that and we'll upgrade the version. So I'm going to log in as admin so we can upgrade our plugin. And now that I'm here, let's say we wanted to make sure that this block appeared on everybody's dashboard. We could go to Site Administration, Appearance, and Default Dashboard Page, and actually add, so we got block editing on, so we can then add our block. So my courses, add the block in there, and that would then appear on this will mean that now when I press the reset dashboard for all users, that will reset everybody's dashboard so that that block appears on their dashboard. It's a bit harsh because if somebody's configured their dashboard in a different way, they would lose all that work, but sometimes that's what happens. So I'll reset the dashboard for all users, and then what I'm going to do is log in as another test user and see what that looks like. So I'm going to log out here, right, and I'm going to log in as 6. Remember the last time I used was 5. Log in, and so I've logged in as somebody who's got his name in Chinese, I think, Mandarin, and so as you can see, my courses block is there. So if I wanted to customize this page and I went to configure my courses block, I could change the name. So let's call it my old courses just for the sake of it, and save changes. But it hasn't changed. What's gone wrong? Well, we need to do something else in our code. So I'm going to leave this logged in and we'll go and have a look at what we need to do. So what do we need to add something in our class? So I'm going to add a new function. The function is called specialization. Now, why do we need this? Because at the time when init is called, the configuration for the block has not been loaded, and so the only thing that's available to the block at that time is the default name, which is in the strings file. With specialization, which is called very early in the process after initializing the block, this function is called, and in this function we can check whether we've got a configuration. Has somebody done something with the configuration of the block? If they have, and the configuration is title, then we can actually set the title now to the configured title name rather than what's just the default. So with this in place, let's see what happens to our code, to our block. Back on the page, let me stop customizing this page, and as you can see, my old courses has come. So we've now got the title that I set for it. Let's look at relook at our old block. So this is our specific setting, the title, and then these other ones are added in by our block, the form that we were extending. So these are standard forms, fields for the forms. Okay, so I'm going to log out now. So that is it for our block. It doesn't really do much, but you get an idea, and you've got lots of things that you could think about doing with blocks, especially if you want to show data that's not easy for users to get to. But like I said, this is it for our block. So now we're just going to have extend our lesson a little bit and look at two other areas, the custom scripts and the site backups. It's generally regarded as bad practice to core hack the Moodle core code. Sometimes it's impossible to avoid it, but before you go ahead and start hacking through core code, it's worthwhile having a look at custom scripts. And what are custom scripts? Custom scripts are any scripts that can be called directly via a URL. So index.php, user view PHP. And they can be customized by placing a file with the same name in my Moodle data directory custom scripts folder. This folder is defined in your config PHP file and is set by that setting. So config custom scripts, and then you point the path to your custom script folder. There's a limit to what you can do with custom scripts, because as we've already said here, it's any scripts that can be called directly via URL. So you can't add additional files into the mix. You have to be careful about what you call, what you require, what you include, because for example here you should never require the config PHP file. Okay, there's other things on the page, though I'm not quite sure. Like this looks like it's old, something that should have been taken out of the page, but I'm not sure. So it seems to have been used extensively by the Moodle for Mobiles project, and there are a couple of things you need to keep in mind. So you cannot override an internal script. So any script that is internal to Moodle cannot be overridden by custom scripts. But the link for this page is in the lesson, so you can come and actually read the whole page if you wanted to, if that might provide a solution for something that you are trying to do. Another thing you might want to be considering is backing up your site. Now it might be something that you handle, and you have your own system of dealing with how you back up your work and back up what you're working on, your laptop, your development server, etc. And this might not really be much relevance to you. So this page, the link will be in the lesson as usual, talks about how you do backups for your Moodle site, and it's worth having a read through, especially as regarding your database. Right now, one of the reasons I point this out is if you are like me and have to deal with lots of different clients with all different expectations, one of the time-consuming things is setting up data for testing and for developing with. So one way of doing it is to populate a Moodle site with test data, lots of test data, etc., and then you back up the database and use that as the base for any new projects. The thing to remember though is you need to do your data, create your data in a earlier version of Moodle than the Moodles you're going to be dealing with. The reason being that the databases are rarely backward compatible. So if you created, let's say, a 3.11 site and then you suddenly found yourself having to work with a 3.9 site, you would not be able to use the same database. You might be able to do some stuff with it, like try and copy some of the data into the 3.9 tables, but it's best to either start with something like 3.6, create your data, etc., and then as you move along the different versions, you can upgrade the data and upgrade the system will automatically upgrade the database if you are trying to work with a later version of Moodle. So this is a useful page to come and look at and see what you need to back up. If you work extensively with files, you need to also think about the Moodle data folder and how you can manage that alongside your database table data. Okay, so that's something you can look at when you're thinking about backups. So since we have a little bit of time left in this lesson, I thought I'll show you another one of the development tools I spoke about in lesson 1 that's available to you as a Moodle developer. This is a Moodle cross-reference and version differences site. So if you've been a PHP developer for quite a while, you probably have come across cross-reference files or cross-reference sites before. This one covers the various latest versions of Moodle, and cross-reference sites, in case you don't know, basically give you access in HTML to the source code, etc., of a PHP project. Okay, so what makes this one slightly different? Well, the difference is that you can also look at differences between the different versions. So if I swing into version 3.11, okay, and I go, let's find a file that will have changed quite considerably between versions, and the one I can think of is deprecated lib, because every version of Moodle there's some kind of deprecation going on. So on this page, which also gives you a summary of the classes and the functions that are defined in the particular file, so you can see there, at the top of it we have defined the differences between the different versions. Now also useful is this at the top, so if you're looking at some code, you can see whether that's still a supported version of Moodle and the minimum requirements, etc. up here. So if we look at these, let's take one where we know there'll be a massive difference between. So this is the difference between version 3.5 and 3.11 of this file. Okay, so we go down the file, and anything in red is what has been taken out, and anything in blue is what has come back in. So by quickly looking at this, you can easily see what's changed between the two versions. So if you're working with Moodle 3.5 and then suddenly find yourself getting messages or suddenly deprecation messages come in from your code as you're trying to upload it, you can look and see where the difference is. So that's one the strongest selling point for this website, really. But then you can also jump from version to version, okay, and you can look at all the classes and functions, etc., defined in it. It's not perfect, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but if you have an idea, oh, I think the function was called something like this, you can come in here and actually search the web page. This is the list of all the functions, and you can look through, or these are the classes, look through them and see if you can find it here, or as such for functions. So we got here functions, variables, constants showing up. So I use it quite extensively, and it's I created the site, and I find it useful. Okay, so this is the link again will be in the course, in the lesson. So that's it for lesson 3. We developed a block plugin. We looked at the Access API, including the roles, permissions, and capabilities. We looked at part 1 of our form API, a basic form API, and then we touched on custom scripts, site backup, and we had a look at one of the development tools.